Hello. I thought it would be helpful to explain a little bit about readability algorithms and the ways we can measure readability. I've mentioned this in some of my conference talks recently, some of my videos and other content online. You might see references to Flesch-Kincaid grade level or Flesch reading ease score or gunning fog index, and all the ways that you can actually quantify how difficult something is to read. They're quite blunt tools, to be frank, but they can be pretty helpful in certain situations. So I just wanted to explain a bit about which is which and what you can use them for. Readability is, I think, having a bit of a moment in B2B, or it certainly will be, for a number of reasons. Firstly, it's recently become possible to measure it right within Microsoft Word, and I think people are beginning to see those statistics and wonder what they are. Secondly, it's just a really simple way to differentiate B2B content in a way that builds trust with your reader. And thirdly, and perhaps most importantly, it's been widely cited as one of the key measures that's helpful in generative engine optimization. So that is influencing the results of ChatGPT and the results of the AI summaries that you get within Google searches increasingly. The direction of travel seems to be that these things will eventually replace search engine results pages for most content. So getting ahead of the game on that, I think, is probably pretty important. So very simply, Flesch-Kincaid grade level, Flesch reading ease score, gunning fog index, all basically measure the same thing: how long the words are and how long the sentences are. Once you know that, it's actually pretty easy to game the score and to manipulate those scores into a place where you want them to be, which can be pretty helpful. The two measures that you currently get in Microsoft Word are Flesch reading ease score and Flesch-Kincaid grade level. The differences are pretty subtle. When I'm talking to clients and stakeholders, I tend to use Flesch reading ease, and I'll explain why in a minute. Arguably, Flesch-Kincaid grade level is the better measure of readability. It's newer, it's been refined based on Flesch reading ease, and it's put slightly more emphasis on sentence length. And it maps the results to a grade level in the US education system. Whereas Flesch reading ease is slightly more slanted towards word length, and it gives you a score that is essentially a percentage. Technically, you can go into minus numbers and you can go beyond 100, but for most content, it's a percentage. The reason I think Flesch reading ease is probably a better fit for B2B is actually those conversations that you tend to have with B2B stakeholders who say, our audience is very educated, so we need to write in a complex way. With Flesch-Kincaid grade level, mapping your readability to a level of education makes it easy to misunderstand that this kind of content is most appropriate for people at that level. Whereas having an effectively percentage score where a higher number is better is just a clearer, easier thing to understand, even if Flesch-Kincaid grade level is arguably a better measure of how complicated your content actually is. Also, to be honest, most B2B marketing content scores below 50% in Flesch reading ease score. So when you're reviewing that with people, psychologically, it looks like a bad score unless you're scoring above 50, which again, all helps to make that argument for making your copy clearer and easier to understand. It's also really useful to fight accusations of dumbing down when you have things like Time magazine or The Economist with reading ease scores between sort of 50 and 60, and broadsheet newspapers between kind of 60 and 70, and then your B2B content is scoring, I don't know, 20, 25, 30. It's quite easy to show that there is a gap there where you can make things easier to understand than they were, and easier to understand than your competitors before you even approach the territory of dumbing down. So how do we read these numbers? What do we look for? Well, Flesch-Kincaid grade level maps to a level of the US education system, which is, a year or two out from what we have in the UK, but it's pretty similar. For most B2B copy, if you can even get to 10s and 11s on that, you're doing pretty well. A lot of content is 20 plus, so that's not bad. But actually, the one I spend more time with, just because it's easier for the stakeholders, is Flesch Reading eScore. And the kind of rule of thumb that I have is I'm aiming for sort of 50 and above. Like if it's in the 40s, it's not bad. 30s is sort of average. 20s, you're getting into something that's actually very, very complicated. Technically speaking, anything under 50 is classified as being very complicated to read, but that's not in the context of B2B copy. So, how do I use these scores in my copy? Obviously, the average sentence length and the average word length is a blunt tool. It doesn't tell you whether your copy is good or bad. You don't want to be too prescriptive about it, but it's a useful guide rail. And the other stats in Word are useful too, like how long is the average sentence in your copy, just as a useful guide rail to broadly keep you on track. Should I be breaking up a few sentences? Are there, a few 4, 5 syllable words where, if I'm honest, there are simpler words I could use instead, while still keeping the technical detail and accuracy of the piece? That guide rail is really helpful as I'm drafting things. The second one is conversations with clients and stakeholders, and particularly people whose natural writing style is kind of complex, and they feel that a complex writing style conveys high status. This is really, really common, particularly in knowledge industries, professional services. When you're talking to accountants, you're talking to lawyers, but also, when you're talking to engineers, people who were used to getting high marks at school for writing complicated text. And what a reading e-score does there is it stops you bringing opinions to a data fight. It stops the conversation being, I prefer this style of writing versus you prefer that style of writing, whose is better, to here is an objective number. Does this piece fulfill that QA criteria, yes or no? It takes it out of that subjective battle of wills and puts it into a context that people are much more willing to engage with, in my experience. Currently, the way that you might explain the need for that is in terms of cognitive load, people reading on mobile devices, people reading in second languages, all of those things that are so common in B2B, but we forget to account for in our copy a lot of the time. But what you'll see more and more of is, as GEO and influencing these AI summaries becomes more and more important, and readability comes to the fore as one of those influencing factors, ensuring you're meeting those AI requirements is going to be another powerful reason to talk about readability, to talk about having just some guideline ballpark measure in place for your copy, not sticking to it too closely necessarily, but having some guide rails there. If you fancy playing with this for yourself, it's really super easy. You go to the editor function in Word, which you can either find on the drop-down menu, or it's that little blue pencil in the top right corner, and you go down the right-hand side, look for Document Stats. That's the button that will give you the juicy statistics about the piece that you've written. And my advice is actually to just play with it. Just see how much you can influence it by replacing a few words, breaking up a few sentences, breaking up a few paragraphs. Or when you have a piece of copy that you like and you're really pleased with the feel of it and it's really readable and it's really engaging, you can paste it into Word and point the editor at it to make it easier to keep yourself in the same ballpark in future. But anyway, that in a nutshell is what I do, how I use readability scoring. But what about you? Am I being too prescriptive? Am I being not prescriptive enough? Is this a thing you've been using in Word for ages or not at all? Or is it something that you might try for the first time? Feel free, get in the comments, let me know. If you'd like me to go into more detail, then you only have to ask. I'll catch you again soon.